is to help drive efficiency in your operations. And Papersave does this because it helps you eliminate the 20 to 30% of your time that's typically spent filing, searching, retrieving information. It also helps drastically reduce the number of documents that are either lost or misfiled. And industry averages tell us that that's 1 out of every 10 documents. So that means once out of every 10 times you go to that filing cabinet to look for information, it's not readily available because it's probably been pulled or misfiled or accidentally destroyed. Now, information is really just a click away from within the SL and the GP user interface. Calls and they need information, you can just simply navigate right through those host systems and be able to easily access that file right from the record. Papersave is also designed to help improve customer service. So if you have to pull a document for a customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, you can immediately retrieve it without having to get up from your desk. And then within another click, you can distribute that on to whomever the recipient is because of that Office and Outlook integration. We also help clients reduce the stress and anxiety around that audit preparation time by helping them eliminate that 40% of their audit prep that's typically spent pulling information out of those filing cabinets. And we do that because there are several different ways that you can search and retrieve on documents that we'll explore here shortly. So lots of cost considerations with managing that paper. On average, it costs about $20 to file a document. And when we think about the amount of time and cost it takes to fill a 4-drawer lateral file cabinet, on average, it costs about $25,000. Now, option number 2, as far as kicking your paper habit, is to really help streamline and automate paper-based processes. And we do that by helping automate things like that matching process. So after a check run, you typically take that check stub and you staple it to the supporting documentation and you put it in the filing cabinet. Well, Papersave capitalizes on the relationships that exist with inside a GP and SL on that transaction level, and then we carry that relationship down to the document level to match those documents. So whether it's a 2-way or 3-way match, Papersave will automate that for you. We'll also help streamline those approval processes. So users have the ability to, route documents electronically so we can stop that paper trail around your operations. And that gives you the insight to where documents are at all points in time in your process. And then when it gets to that last step, it's going to automate that filing for you as well. So once again, it's going to save you all that time on the back end of the process. Reason number 3 to kick that paper habit is to really help connect and collaborate. We're going to connect people to information when they need it. We're going to allow them to be self-servicing, whether they're in the same office or they're scattered around in regional offices or even home offices if you support virtual employees. We're going to allow them to participate in those approval processes so they can now participate in mobile devices or tablets, as well as just browser-based reviews and approvals. And they're going to be able to contribute information into that process as well, so that if they have a document that they need to file or they need to add into the approval process, they're going to be able to scan it in. So if you have remote locations that may be sending you those documents on a weekly basis through Federal Express or UPS, or even a courier service, it's fairly common, you can actually allow them to scan information into the process in a timely fashion, because we can monitor email accounts, and we also can pick up documents from network folders or FTP sites, whichever is the easiest way for your users to contribute information into the system. So the obvious starting point when we think about a paperless office is accounts payable, and primarily because it's a very paper-intensive process and it's really riddled with lots of overhead costs. We've got cost to file, cost to maintain those filing systems, both on-site and off-site. Some of you all may have transportation costs between locations. There's a lot of time involved to field vendor inquiries when invoices aren't paid in a timely fashion. And then there's also that overhead cost per invoice processed. Now with Papersave, we're going to help eliminate that data entry. We're going to automate that filing, and we're going to allow you to actually reduce your monthly close process time. But there are lots of other areas for consideration, such as the financial side. What are you going to do with those bank statements, those investment statements, the journal entry backup, petty cash receipts? On the financial, or excuse me, on the sales side, sales order documents. You know, you've got your inbound customer purchase order, you've got correspondences, maybe other supporting documents, delivery tickets, pick lists, cash receipts coming in the door, and so forth. HR, another area that's riddled with a lot of paper and documents, such as I-9s and W-4s and onboarding documents and benefit renewals and vacation sick requests. And then there are lots of other areas like legal, reports that you produce, marketing related documents, and so forth. So with Papersave, we have an expression, why stop at AP when Papersave goes well beyond the accounts payable solution? Now, since AP is a paper-intensive process, we'll start there, and then we'll explore other ways that you can use the system, because we do offer 11 different ways to capture a document. And the nice thing there is you have a lot of flexibility, because the way we might use the system in AP may be very different than that HR director and the way that they want to add in a document. So here's a very simple kind of flow chart, if you will, that will explore and look at the system in action through these various steps. Now with Papersave, we're going to start first with capture. Right, we're going to grab those documents as they're coming in the door, and we can grab them multiple ways. We can capture them through a scanner, so those paper-based documents coming in, we can still scan them. We can also monitor email accounts. Now that's important because over the past 3 to 4 years, you've probably noticed the number of invoices coming in electronically has grown substantially. And on average, about 35% of documents last year alone came into operations electronically. Now, the last thing we want you to do is have to print them out and scan them into the system, so we'll monitor that email account and bring them into the system automatically. Now, documents coming to individuals, they can still use our Office or Outlook integration to electronically insert documents into the process from some toolbars, or they could also forward it over to that group email account and it gets brought in that same way. Now this next step of the process is what we refer to as extraction. Don't worry, we're not going to extract any wisdom teeth. This is actually a good type of extraction because it's going to help you eliminate or drastically reduce that data entry that's required to create the transaction. So we're going to lift off information like vendor, date, dollar amount, invoice number right off of the document so that you don't have to key it into the system. And we're actually going to validate it right against the Dynamics database. So vendor, right? We're going to know that that vendor record's already in the system, and we're going to bring forward information right at the step to validate it. So that way when we're getting to the end of the process, we're not dealing with different exceptions that we have to address. We're going to cleanse that information as we go through the process. Now the third step of this process is the approval. You might have a very simple one-tiered approval process or a multi-tiered approval process, but this is where those approvers are going to get email alerts letting them know that documents are out there and what they need to review specifically. Then we have that integration. So that integration at this point is going to create the transaction right within Dynamics, and it's going to associate the data, associate the document to that newly created record in the system. And then we produce those AP checks, and then we automate that match. So here's a very simple look at one of our workflow processes. And you'll notice here we've got different blocks of information. Each block represents a step. And as you can see, this insert that's come up, this step of the process, it has a decision point or a business rule. So it's actually saying, hey, if this invoice is within that manager's threshold, allow them to approve it and then send it to data entry. Okay, and that's that automation where that transaction is going to be created. However, if it's over their threshold, it's still going to allow them to approve it, and then it's going to send it up to the next level for the next reviewer to approve or reject. Now, by forcing business rules like this, what's nice is it's going to make sure that information and documents are treated consistently. And of course, that's one of those things that the auditors look for in any approval process during their audit. Now, there are lots of different roles that people will play. One is just maybe I'm at the front desk or maybe I'm in the mail room, and my role is simply capturing the documents into the system. They're coming in paper form. And that's what we refer to as distributed capture. So I can just take a whole stack of documents and scan them right to a network folder that Papersave monitors, and it's going to bring those documents into that extraction step automatically for me. Now, when we move over to those approvers, as I mentioned, those approvers are going to get email alerts that are going to allow them to approve documents right from their tablet or phone or their desktop computer. And then we have the process managers, which are you all. And you can actually go into the workflow and see where every document is. So if you're doing accruals, you can see where all that information is. If you get a phone call from a vendor, you can easily search on it. And you can reroute documents in process as well. So let's flip over to Papersave and let's take a look at some of those options and the ways that documents can move from one step of the process to the other. Now let's start with that extraction step. Now that extraction step is great because, as I mentioned, it's going to help you reduce the data entry. So we're going to bring in a stack of documents, and those documents, if there are no exceptions to the information that's been captured, it's going to bypass this step or go through this step automatically and then put that document out there for that approver without you even having to handle it. Okay, now that's important because if you can train your vendors to send you documents electronically through, like, an email account like accounts payable at or AP support at your domain, then it can actually go through, if it's a good quality document, which most of those electronic documents are, go through this extraction process and be in the hands of the approver without you even having to touch it. Now, in this case, we have some exceptions here that we need to deal with, or my system could also be configured where I want to look at every document as I'm getting used to this new technology. Maybe I don't want that pass through automatically. So it's going to show me what's out there. It's going to show me the information that has been extracted from those documents over here on the left side of the screen, and I can have the system automate kind of a quality control check for any low confidence character. I can also have the system alert me to any information that I've said is required that it didn't capture, okay? And I can do that through my toolbar options. So for example, by hitting F8 on my toolbar, it's going to bring up any of that information that I have said is required that it did not capture. Okay, so for example, we clicked here and this vendor doesn't even have any of that profile information populated. Well, and that may be because we have not processed computer training systems yet through this automation engine. So this allows me to point and click and train the system on where to find that information going forward. Now, as I'm clicking and capturing that information, you can see how it's populating it over here in this template. You'll also notice that based on that vendor name and that address and that zip code, it's actually brought forward that vendor ID right from the GP database. Okay, and then I can go ahead and populate these other fields. So when I click on amount, you'll notice that every single field that is a numeric value is highlighted for me. So I can click on the appropriate amount and date an invoice number and PO number and, description, any of that other information that's important. Okay. Now, I also can go through a low confidence character check by hitting F7. Now, F7 will bring up any low confidence character, which allows me the ability to say, hey, it's correct or it's incorrect. So here, you can see a zoomed in portion of the document, whereas up here is what was actually captured. And that is, in fact, a slash, so I can go ahead and confirm that. So now this batch is, we've addressed any of those data or those quality control issues, and now we have the ability to send this batch on to those approvers. Okay. So that's how information can be extracted. We can create that template in the system so Papersave knows where to find it in the future, and then we send that information out to those approvers. Okay. Now the next step are going to be those approvers, right? So they're going to play a vital role, and those approvers are going to get email alerts. So this is an example of an email alert, right? It's telling me that I, as a director level reviewer, have 3 items out there to review, and I can see that information about those 3 items in greater detail. Now, depending on how the system's configured, I have different options available here within this alert. So I can click on the appropriate option. So if I'm on my mobile phone or I'm on a tablet, I can click on, the mobile or the browser review, and then Papersave takes me into the approval process. And then I can see those 3 documents. Now, if I don't approve those documents today, they're still going to show up on my email alert the next time it is triggered to be sent off. So now I can take a look at the invoice. I can see a conversation panel, maybe like a communication thread between the different approvers. And if I don't want to see that on the screen, no worries, because you can see how I can unpin it, and it will slide on and off. Here I can see that information. If I wanted to add an annotation onto the document or type some notes onto the document, I have that capability. If I want to see where this document has come from before it came to me, I can do that as well. So here you can see that it was approved from the manager level review step, and it's sitting here in this director level review step by Tammy Bauer, and that action was done earlier today. Okay, and I can also see here owner change. So that meant the document went into the system and it switched owners, right? Maybe somebody redirected the document because the previous owner was David Furnish, and then it went over to Luann George, and that was done, that change was made by Tammy Bauer on this date and this time. So the system's going to track every single step that the document travels through and any change in the status as well. So you really do get a full audit trail. Now here's that profile information. So as it's been extracted off of the document, right, we're going to capture that information here. And also, you'll notice as I scroll down, there may be additional pieces of information. Now, this additional information allows me, or allows an approver, if that's part of your required process, to go in and do that level of distribution. So if I go, oh, I'm looking for my, telephone account, and I can actually do a real-time lookup right on the Dynamics database for that account information, right? And then I can add in the debit, the credit amount, and any other pieces of information or additional lines as well in case it needs to be distributed to multiple accounts. Okay. Now, if that information is left blank, if you have those defaults within side of that vendor card or record, then it's going to bring those forward for you at the last step in the process as we're creating that transaction. So now I can hit approve or reject or whatever action is appropriate for the step of the process, and then it's going to bring up the next document for me. And of course, if I want to fit this to the width or fit this to the height, I can do that. And then it keeps moving these documents through the process. Now, every time I take that action, whether it's approve or reject, or I move the document, it tracks that in the audit trail going forward. So before we create these transactions inside of Dynamics, let's look at this workflow area from an insight perspective. Now, because I am in here as a workflow administrator, I can take a look at all of those steps of the process. So if I want to see everything sitting out there across all of my managers, I can click that step, and then I can see all of those documents here. Right? It's going to paginate that information so that, you know, if you have 1,000 documents, it's not going to be sluggish in opening up the browser. It's going to allow you to say, hey, I want to see all of them, or I want to see a specific number of them per page. Right? So now I can see I've got 157 documents total out there in my workflow. And if I want to see all of the documents belonging to Holly, oops, well, Holly doesn't have any. How about Paula? We can take a look at those documents. Okay. Now, if I get a phone call from a vendor, right, I have that capability to put in that vendor information, or maybe the invoice information, and so forth. Now, here, if I take a look and their vendor calls me regarding this invoice here, and I said, oh, you know what, it has been out there, gosh, for over a month. Well, there are different ways that Papersave can address those bottlenecks, right? There can be automation rules which say, hey, if Tammy, or let's see, current owner is actually Mindy, if Mindy is held on to this document for more than 2 business days or 3 business days, it can automatically send it up to that next level of reviewer. Or, you know, if I get in here and I want to actually redirect a document, I could do that as well. So here under options, this allows me to basically come in and say, hey, I want to transfer this document from Mindy over to Sam. And now this document has been updated. Okay, so we've transferred it from Mindy as a current owner to Sam. And now Sam's going to get that email alert letting him know that a document's out there that needs his review. Now, another way that we also address bottlenecks is allowing a workflow user to mark themselves as out of the office. So instead of documents coming in, and let's say I'm going to be out of the office and paper starts piling up on my desk, what Papersave really allows me to do is say, hey, I'm going to be out of the office and I'm going to be coming back on the 3rd. And in that period of time, I'm going to let Doug be my delegate. And I can say, hey, Doug, you know, please approve in my absence. And he's going to get this information with every document that's being redirected over to him. Okay, so that way documents keep flowing through the system. Now, the other thing, as you're thinking about monthly close, you know, it's important to know where all of that information is. What's from last month, what's from this month. So if you want to filter or add any columns or you know, filter by activity, you could do that in here. You also have this nice feature to export. So if we export this data out to Excel, we can use this as the foundation for our accrual entry. So if we want to remove anything for this period, we could do that. And then you'll also notice over here in column A, you have a hyperlink. So if I want to, at any point in time, go in and say, oh, show me that invoice for Crown Metal Corporation, I can click on it, and then it takes me into that document. Okay, now this spreadsheet, if I come down and bring that home tab down, you can also see a Papersave option right on my toolbar. So I can actually save this and associate it with that accrual entry inside of Dynamics, right? And then you've got all that backup, and you always have those hyperlinks to those documents going forward. Okay, so let's pop back over here to the workflow. And let's change hats and we're going to look at that integration. Now that integration is called a step I've named accounts payable, right? Here are all of those documents that have met and satisfied all of your approval steps, right? And I as the accounts payable person can see all of that information here in this workflow item history. I can take a look at all of that information. I can make any updates to it if needed. And then from here, I'm going to hit Submit. Now, Submit's going to take this information and it's going to feed this profile information into Dynamics to create either that voucher in SL or that AP transaction or enter match or whatever the transaction type is into GP. And it uses web services. And of course, there are two different integration tools that are available between GP and SL, but that Submit is going to take that information, create that transaction, and it's also going to file that document for me. Okay? So that is a little bit about the workflow and that automation. So now let's pop over into Dynamics. I have the GP user interface open right now. But going forward, the system works the same way really across GP and SL with just a few minor details. But here, if I want to take a look at that transaction, I'm going to navigate to that voucher or to that AP transaction, however I do so within inside the version of Dynamics that you're using. And as I open up that record, right, so here it's going into a batch. As I open up that record, right, Papersave tells me that documents exist. So the minute you open up a record inside a GP or SL, and there are documents, Papersave is going to let you know that. And there's a hyperlink there, and clicking on that little record will take you into that document. Okay, so once again, if I want to hide some of these panels of information, I have that capability. But now you can see not only has this document been approved, but it's also been submitted into Dynamics, and that document has been associated. And you can also take a look and see all of that record information here that gets stored in comments. Now that information here stored in comments happens to be the same information that is also above the document going forward that we can reference anytime we pull a group of documents. Okay, so very tight and seamless integration with the host system. So going forward, anytime you have a question, right, you just navigate right through Dynamics using just your general navigation. You're going to open up that record. Papersave is going to tell you that documents exist. Here's that link to access the document. Here's the document. So if you needed to provide this document to somebody, right, could be a customer-driven document, could be an employee-driven document, journal entry backup, whatever the case, you're going to have a whole bunch of options here on your toolbars, on the different ribbons. So here, if I want to email the document, I can email the document either by an attachment or I can also send a link. Now, if I send it out via attachment, right, it's going to pop that up and you can see that attachment. However, if this is a more sensitive document, maybe it's something pertaining to an employee. Maybe it's something that has credit card information on it and we have to be careful for compliance reasons. I can also send it as a link. Now, sending it as a link also requires the recipient to have access to that document type inside of Papersave in order to be able to view it. Now, also, under Navigate and Edit, you have annotations. And for every document type in the system, you can define who can add an annotation, who can hide an annotation, as well as who can delete an annotation. So there are great ways of collaborating on a document and also protecting information on a document in case some information is more sensitive, like credit card numbers, social security numbers, and so forth. We can either burn it in permanently as a redaction or hide it and use it based on security rights in the system as to who can even see this option on my toolbar to hide those annotations. Now, the other nice thing under options is a complete audit trail. So when you think of record management going forward, who's touched this document, who's printed it, who's saved it, who's emailed it, and so forth. So now when we go into that audit log, we can see who's done what with this document. And that way, if somebody leaves under suspicious terms, you can actually go into the system and see what exactly it is that they've touched, either by document level here, or there are reports that you can run giving you more of that macro view. Now, another option that we have from a search and retrieval option is inside a GP, and it's a feature that's specific to GP called the Smart List. And within the Smart List, if you needed to pull a whole group of documents out, maybe documents that were coded to a certain GL account for a certain time frame, maybe over a certain dollar amount, because this is what your auditors are looking for, you can create that Smart List. GP is going to show you those results, and then within a click, I'm going to pull all of those documents from a query. Okay, so here are 1,000 different transactions. Of course, it's showing me the debit and the credit side of the transaction. Here are those documents showing me in summary form. So every row represents a document. The columns of information help identify what record or transaction that document's related to. So if I wanted to open up that group of documents, I can select that group. Now it's going to present those documents to me one after the other after the other, right? So here it's going to show me all of that information. Now also you'll notice right above that document is that record information. Now that information is being pulled right from GP. So we know that this document is tied to voucher 368. Right? And if I scroll forward, we know that this document is tied to voucher 469. And then, of course, from here I can print save the individual document I'm looking at, or I can manage that group of documents from my toolbar as well. Now back here in the Multiple Document Explorer screen, you have options just like you saw within the Workflow Viewer. Whereas if I want to export this and give this to my auditor, I could do that, right? So I can grant that auditor temporary access into the system. And from here, if the auditor wants to take a look at, this invoice for, Northwind Traders, he or she can just click on that link and be self-servicing. And then when that audit's done, you can remove them from that access, and then they can no longer access that information. But keep in mind, you always can go in and verify what exactly it is that they even looked at while in the system. Okay, so that's an example of the Smart List integration. And then, of course, one of the things I can't remember if I mentioned earlier is anytime you're looking at these grids, you always can look at information different ways. So if you want to sort this ascending or descending, maybe by voucher number, or you want it to drill into a document, maybe I want to take a look at this document for Fujitsu, right? So let me drill into that document just by double-clicking. And if I'm looking at this document and I go, oh, I want to see a copy of that check or a copy of the contract, I could come here to Options and I can show associated documents. So here I can see the contract, I can see the payment, I can of course also see that invoice that we were just looking at and drill down into that associated content. Now that's been automated by that matching process that I mentioned earlier that is based on this host system and the records and how they're related to one another. We're just carrying that down to the document level. Now, there are lots of other ways that you can use Papersave. It does go across GP and SL with a very in-depth integration. So if you want to add in a document, maybe for a vendor, right, open up or create that vendor record. And then from additional, you can add a document. Now, if I'm adding a document for Fabricam, well, what type of document am I adding? This Papersave profile allows you to specify things, and these are all user-defined fields. So if I'm adding in a W-9 form, I can specify a W-9 form, and this allows me to do a cross-record search. So if I got that W-9 form in here electronically, I can drag and drop that document into the system. And then, of course, I can save and exit. Now, another option is if I want to come here and say, hey, I got this W-9 form, and my preference is to add it into Papersave right from my Office or Outlook toolbars, I can do that. And I can say, oh, I want to add it to a vendor, and then I can search on that vendor record. Okay, so here I can put in show all records, and if I want to add it to Fabricam, I can then select Fabricam. So what we're doing there is really just doing a lookup right on that GP vendor table or that SL vendor table, or whatever table it is that I had selected, and then it allows me to add that document. Right, and then I can say, oh, it's a W-9 form, and then save and exit. Okay, so you can see there are two different options for adding, that document into the system. Now, it works the same way across, any record type. So even if I come here to journal entry, and maybe I created a journal entry, and let me just pull one up just in the interest of time that's already there, and I want to add a document. Right? We can add document. You can see how we captured that record information. And now you can see other options. I can scan now. I can scan later. I can attach a file. I can drag and drop in here. I could use that Office Outlook integration and so forth. So maybe I want to add the spreadsheet to this entry. It's going to bring in a copy of that spreadsheet, and it's going to allow me to view that document right here within Papersave, and that's where it's going to be stored going forward. Some of you all may also use customer records. So, once again, if I have an invoice or a cash receipt or, a customer document I want to add, same thing. Now, those two scanning options, these are nice options. One of them is scan as you go type option with scan now. It does leverage a desktop scanner. So if I have a document that's paper form and I want to add it into the system, I can easily do so by dropping that document in my scanner that's just here on my desktop and clicking Scan Now. It's going to call up that scanner using Twain drivers, and it is going to image that document for me. So it brings it in, it converts it to a searchable PDF file, it names it, saves it, compresses it, associates it right with American Electrical, and then I can save and exit. Now, not everyone's going to have a desktop scanner, nor does everybody need a desktop scanner. So you also have another scanning option called Scan Later. And Scan Later allows you to use a network scanner because it is going to print out a barcoded cover sheet for you. Okay, so I'm just going to print this cover sheet to my desktop so we can take a look at it. And this barcode is what Papersave is going to use going forward to associate the paper I have in my hands right now with this record that is outlined on this cover sheet. So when I scan it, it's going to be cover sheet, document, cover sheet, document, cover sheet, document. We're just going to take that big stack, drop it in the scanner, image it to a folder, and then Papersave is going to pick up that information, and then it's going to do two important things with this cover sheet. One is it's going to separate them, right? So it knows where to insert those document breaks, because every time it sees this barcode, it's going to insert document break. And then that barcode is also going to tell the system where the document needs to be filed, right? So it's going to file it back to this record, right? So here's that database in case y'all are using multiple companies. Here's the record type that it's going to be associated back to, and here is the type of document it is, right? And then, of course, as I scroll down, you can see specifically that record. So that way you can get information into the system and get it associated very easily just by using existing scanning hardware. Now let's take a look at another search option. So now we've kind of bounced around a little bit, added different document types. You can see how Papersave acts the same way across all the rest of the system. But now when it comes to pulling information out, we can pull those documents out using this Papersave search feature. Now the search feature allows me to search for documents different ways. So we added a W-9 form, or actually we added a couple W-9 forms, right? Now here you can see those two W-9 forms that we just added. And in this case, I searched on this document type, this structured data that you've given to your users so that they're using the system consistently, right? And that allows me to do searches on that information. So now we have pulled out all of those W-9 forms across all of those vendor records. So it's actually doing a cross-record search. So pretty powerful, because what we've done here is we've not just filed the document to a record, but we've added on additional dimension into the system, allowing you to search for information different ways. Now, we've also added another dimension. So if I want to search on information based on what is within the body of the document, I could do that as well. So I can type in a value, and it's almost like a Google or a Bing type of search, because now it has searched through my document libraries that I have access to, right? Now, if colleagues did the same search and they only have access to accounts payable record types and document types, then they're only going to see a couple rows, whereas I am in here as administrator, so I can see everything. Now, if I want to filter, maybe I want to look at just those employee documents, right? So now I can see there are two certifications, one for Brenda and one for Angela. And if I drill into those documents, you can see where Papersave's actually highlighted that value that we searched on right here. So it doesn't matter where, whether it's a freestanding value, it's embedded in a larger string, or it's at the end, right? It still is going to retrieve that document for you. So that is what we refer to as a content search. Now let's take a look at Papersave outside of Dynamics. So a lot of times we hear from customers that one of the drains on their finance team time is the number of inquiries that they have to field from the department heads. And so Papersave allows those department heads to come into the system and access information and even add information if you want to give them rights. So we have a tool here called Papersave Web, and it's a complete browser-based tool, so it's great from a deployment perspective because everybody already has a browser on their desktop and their tablet and their mobile device. But here they can come in and say, hey, I'm looking for that invoice for Fujitsu, right? Maybe Fujitsu just called me and asking me if something has been paid, and I said, well, I don't know. Instead of necessarily having to send it over to somebody else, I could come here and say, oh yeah, here's that invoice number 11111, right? Here's the document. So we know it is inside of Papersave. We know it's already associated with the record, and we can see that information here. And I say, oh, well, here, let me see if it has been processed. So I can come here to options and go to show associated options, and I can take a look at that payment. And I can say, oh, yeah, Mr. Vendor, it looks like this has been paid, and it actually there were 2 other invoices that were paid by this check as well. Do you want a copy? Oh, yes, please. So now I can email them a copy of that document, a copy of that check for their records. Okay, so that is a little bit about self-servicing. Now, you can also store documents in the system that really aren't related to Dynamics, right? So here if I come in the system and I said, you know what, I've got posting reports, I've got patient files, I've got legal documents, lease agreements. We can create document types that relate to a Dynamics record or are freestanding. So if I have legal documents, I could come and take a look at those legal documents because I have rights to it, so I actually see it. And if I want to take a look at any condo documents, right, I can filter on those documents. If I want to add a document, right, I can come here and add a document. So you'll notice that this is a pure window through a web browser. So, you know, you can even use Papersave you know, without the traditional desktop thick client deployment. You can actually use it within a web deployment as well. So now we can specify what type of legal document and how do we want to add it. Do we want to scan now, scan later, drag and drop, attach a file, and so forth. Okay, so that way you can use the system across GP. Of course, you can also use those same search features because those search features you can include or exclude those non-Dynamics related documents. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation since we have a little bit of time left, and let's take a look at just some wrap-up items. So as you can see, hopefully from today's presentation, you know, if you're considering going paperless, AP is really a great place to start because it is paper intensive, it is riddled with overhead costs, and you know, it's an area that most people want to address immediately. However, Papersave can be used across Dynamics and beyond to give you access to information, no matter if it's related to a financial record or an employee or has nothing to do with Dynamics. So all of these options, whether you're looking at automation, to better manage your approval processes, just basic document storage, it's all geared to increase your efficiency, your collaboration amongst your team members, and at the end of the day, reduce those costs. Reduce the cost from the on-site and off-site storage, reduce the cost from document replication. On average, a document gets copied 19 times in its life, so there's a lot of overhead costs with paper and toner and wear and tear on those printers and so forth to really reduce all of those costs across your operation.